The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Tonia Antoniazzi to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 607317 relating to requirements to stop and report road traffic collisions involving cats. Now, it is indeed a great pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mrs Harris, and going back to the petition, I'd like to say this petition seeks to amend legislation to make it a legal requirement for a driver to stop and report accidents involving cats. This petition has been signed by 102,436 people across the UK, with the highest number being in Tunbridge Wells. And it's often said that Britain is a nation of animal lovers. And as I'm sure all our inboxes will attest, animal welfare is an issue that moves people from all walks of life to engage with their representatives, from use of animals in research to livestock transport. But as a nation, we are particularly attached to our pets. According to the PDSA, around 52% of UK adults own a pet, with our pet playing a huge part in our lives. And for many of us, we consider our pet another member of the family. While dogs are the most common pet in the UK, cats aren't far behind, with 1 in 4 households being home to at least one cat. And cats are often misunderstood as a choice of pet. Non-cat owners may wonder what is to be gained from a pet who operates completely on their own terms. Cat owners will know that this is just one part of the mystique of having a cat. The 2022 Cats and Their Stats report from the Cat Protection found that companionship, reducing loneliness and reducing stress were collectively the top reasons for owning a cat, highlighting... I will.
Thank you very much for giving this away. Would she agree with me that certainly during the COVID pandemic, we have seen both the ownership of cats and dogs increase because of that companionship that they offer, and it's very particularly for people living on their own. It was really important during that situation. And I'm sure she will agree with me as well that if an animal is run over, whether that be a dog or a cat, you know, for the owner in many cases not to find out ever what actually happened to that animal is very, you know, is heartbreaking. And these are pets and they should be treated in the same way.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
I thank my right honourable friend for his contribution, because it is true. We love our pets. They are a huge part of the fabric of our families, of our lives. And he is right to say that, you know, we saw an increase during COVID. Therefore, you know, there are necessary measures that need to be brought into place so that there isn't the heartache. And I will go on to talk about that when a pet disappears and is not accounted for. So, as we've spoken about, the importance of pet cats for the well-being of their owners, and especially during COVID and around loneliness. But the report also showed that 92% of owners see their cat as part of the family, as I've said, and 67% say that their cat gives them something to get up for in the morning. This, alongside their independent natures, inquisitiveness and aloofness, has helped them to be one of our favourite pets. It's a reflection of the nation's love of animals that the UK ranks highly on the world stage on animal welfare, but there are gaps in legislation, particularly relating to our feline companions. When it comes to our pets, we would do all that we can to protect them, but sometimes it isn't enough. The sadness of losing a pet, a part of the family, is only exacerbated by not knowing what has happened, and this sad state of affairs is the reality for many cat owners across the United Kingdom. And for many cat owners, a missing pet becomes assuming that their cat has been hit by a vehicle and has simply been left by the roadside to be picked up by the local authorities' refuse services. Now, that is a blunt description, I know, but I will.
Cameron.
She's making what is such an important speech in this very vital debate to many constituents. And would she agree on the point that she was making about the local authorities, that further support should be given to local authorities to make sure they have the necessary resources to scan cats where they are found, and dogs as well, and make sure that owners are notified?
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank the Honourable Lady for that contribution. I will go on to talk about local authorities, and I do think that it's a case of them having the necessary resources for them to be able to scan animals and to know that they are accounted for. So, the petitioner, Olivia, is here today and an avid campaigner for cats protection. And when we spoke just before Christmas, you know, she's thankful that this wasn't her situation when she lost her cat. Because when their beloved cat was lost, and who was very, very much part of the family, the cat was killed by a car. However, a good-hearted neighbour found the cat, knocked on all the doors until the owner was found in order to let them know. But it shouldn't be down to luck, and it shouldn't be down to a good Samaritan. I will.
Oswald.
And I think that she makes a really important point here, because I think that most people, most residents of all of our communities would want to do the right thing. They would want to make an owner aware of that kind of tragedy that's happened. They would appreciate the hurt and the sadness that the family would feel and wouldn't want to leave them in the dark. And I wonder if she would agree with me that groups like Cats Protection Giffnock in my constituency have done really valuable work on this very issue. And I think that they really ought to be commended for making sure that this is kept in the public eye, and I hope that we see some progress.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
I thank the honourable member for her contribution, because, you know, doing the right thing makes it gives us heart, doesn't it? And the work that the Cats Protection have done, and all the organisations that have campaigned for cats, are to be commended, because their work is excellent in keeping it in the public eye, and that is really important. I will, yes.
Christie.
Given when I pay tribute to the work that she has done on this, having previously put forward a presentation bill on compulsory microchipping of cats, we're waiting for the legislation to come in. I thank the government for doing that. The second part of that presentation, Bill, was the issue about reporting after an accident. Of course, the great majority of people in our great country would do the right thing, but it comes down to a basic principle. It's about parity of esteem. People love their dogs as they do with their cats, and we have legislation here at the moment under Section 170 of the Road Traffic Act, which covers horses, cattle, asses, mules, sheep, pigs, goats, dogs, but not cats. But the question is that people in my constituents around the country ask, why not? Because if the primary objective is to alleviate pain and suffering, then we need to make sure we have that parity for cats as well.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
And the Honourable Member makes a very good contribution, and I thank him for that. And it is something I'm going to go on to talk about. But the Road Traffic Act was not put in place with that in mind, unfortunately. But it is the microchipping, which he has worked so significantly on, is something I am going to go on and talk about as well. So I thank him for his contribution. Yes.
Following on from the honourable member, the government previously committed to bringing forward regulations to make cat microchipping compulsory before the end of last year, but many charities are very concerned that they have not yet to be laid. Does the honourable member share these concerns?
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Yes, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her contribution there, because that is exactly what I am going to be talking about. And I agree with her that microchipping legislation should be brought forward. So under the Road Traffic Act 1988, Section 170, drivers are required to stop and report incidents of hitting a horse, cattle, ass, mule, sheep, pig, goat or dog, as the Honourable Member has spoken about. And the Act, as it is, reflects an understanding of animals as having a financial value attached to them as livestock or as working animals. And as such, cats are not covered by the Act. But Olivia, our petitioner, and organisations including Battersea and the Blue Cross want this to change, because there is currently no legal requirement to report. We simply do not know how many cats are killed by vehicles. One only needs to have a quick search through their local area's Facebook group to know that, and that is sadly very commonplace. 52% of respondents to the Petitions Committee survey on this debate said that they had lost a cat as a result of a road traffic accident, with a further 14% suspecting that their cat had been killed, but they didn't have any proof. And the reality is that not all drivers comply with the Act as it stands. In my own constituency, for example, one particular road has become notorious for cattle deaths at night, with the deceased animals being found by other drivers in lighter hours and that reported then. So whether or not there is a place for cats in this Act, we do know that the Act isn't fully fit for purpose as it is. So how can the government help to ensure cat owners, like Olivia, aren't left in limbo when it comes to losing their beloved pet? I will.
Andy Slaughter.
I had the pleasure to host the event in Parliament just before Christmas by Cats Protection, and 76 MPs and peers turned up for that, which I think shows where the sympathies of members lie. Does my friend agree that it's a shame that the government is out of step with the view of members here, that it should look at this matter again? It's dismissed it rather out of hand in the response to the petition, and that this goes hand in hand with microchipping, which, if the government has said it will bring forward microchipping, it should now do that. It said it would do it by the end of last year, and it should do that in tandem with introducing these provisions on reporting.
Well, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the point that he made, and also for hosting the Cats Protection before Christmas, because it really was well attended. And the point of these events is to raise awareness and to talk to peers and members of Parliament regarding the importance of cats and raising awareness of legislation that's not fit for purpose. So, we don't need a huge uprooting of legislation here to get this right. Small changes would make a huge difference to cats and cat owners. So firstly, we need the government to finally make good on their promise to make it a legal requirement for cats to be microchipped. In their 2022 cats report, the Cats Protections estimate that 2.8 million cats are not microchipped. That means that they don't have any permanent identification. We know that microchipping is a hugely important part of responsible pet ownership, and making it compulsory for cat owners sends a vital message that it is an integral part of looking after a cat. Now, the government had planned to lay the regulations by the end of 2022 to bring compulsory cat microchipping into force after a transition period, and sadly this has not happened yet. So I would be most grateful if the responding minister would be able to confirm a timetable for the enactment of this legislation. In fact, what a wonderful opportunity the minister has to come forward with this change, which the government has supported. And secondly, requiring local authorities to scan and log cat fatalities would make a huge difference. Currently, Highways England contracts already include a requirement to identify and inform the owner of any domesticated animal fatality on main trunk roads, with keepers given the opportunity to come forward and collect their pet remains. But local authorities, who cover the rest of the road network, are duty-bound to remove deceased animals, but are not duty-bound to scan and log, although many do. It's inconsistent across the United Kingdom. So, Minister, the infrastructure already exists. By requiring local authority to make attempts to identify cat fatalities, comfort and certainty can be given to owners whose cats are killed in these accidents. A Freedom of Information request carried out by Cats Protection in May 2019 found that 92% of local councils in England do have some sort of arrangement in place to scan cats, but only 75% inform the chip company. It's clear there is a lack of consistency on this front, and intervention from the government would only improve this. Now, it's true to say that cats and dogs, while both beloved choices of pet, have different legal standings. This would bring, we should be bringing parity between the two and making it less difficult. Dog owners are legally required to keep their dog under control in public, whereas cats are said to have the right to roam, although owners are still responsible for making sure that their cats do not cause injury or damage to property. This so-called right to roam has often ended conversations on cat welfare legislation for reasons that I've already discussed today, but this needn't be the case. Unlike so many of the issues we discuss within these walls, this isn't a complex problem, Minister. The infrastructure needed to implement the changes already exists. Charities like Cats Protection are already working with local authorities to provide them with scanners and to support this work. These changes may not save cats, but they can prevent any added heartbreak. And I want to extend my deepest thanks to Olivia for starting this petition and starting the conversation. She's not asking for an overhaul of legislation, just the chance for the owners, other owners, to feel the closure she has felt at such a traumatic time. I thank you, Mrs. Harris.
Can I remind members that should they wish to speak, they need to bob. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 607317 relating to requirements to stop and report road traffic collisions involving cats. James Daly.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Harrison. Can I genuinely say what an honour it is to serve under your chairmanship? Genuinely mean that. It is a pleasure to follow a speech which I do not disagree with a word in respect to that. I congratulate Olivia, who sat at the back. This is one of the, I think, easiest legislative exercises probably in the whole of what we're going to have in this Parliament. You simply add a word into a legislation, which is cat, and then we achieve what has been said. And much as we all love goats, and things, but we shouldn't be differentiating in respect of animals on value. We differentiate and judge things within this House on their meaning to our fellow citizens. And it is, to me, utterly bizarre that the law does not take into account cats because of how many people in this country own cats, how important they are to people in this, in our fellow citizens. And I hope the Minister, a well-known animal lover that he is, that will listen to this and will look into doing something which is very straightforward and which will make a lot of people very happy. And in this House, although we struggle from time to time, Mrs. Harris, we have the opportunity to do something which will make people extremely happy. Of course.
Christie.
And I think he's made the point very clearly. It's easily done if we look at what is the purpose behind the legislation. The government has put forward the argument to say that it's one's a working animal or a financial value of the animal. But legislation, does he agree with me, should be designed. Stopping and reporting is with regards to alleviate pain and suffering, irrespective of what animal it is. And that would tie into the government's commitment to animal welfare and moving forward in doing the right thing. Does he agree with that principle needs to be behind the legislation?
James Daly.
My honourable friend, Mrs Harris, I think I'm probably going to agree with everything that everybody says in this debate. So I would just say that's a very articulate point that he's made in respect of that. And if it is the government's position that this is not enforceable in the sense that if a car hits a cat somehow, that's not an enforceable legal right compared to hitting another animal, I just don't accept that whatsoever. And I don't think there is, in my view, a logical argument in respect to the criminal, sort of the criminal law side in respect to this. I was a criminal lawyer for a long time, and this is a very straightforward matter to enforce, to report, and there is no ambiguity in terms of how this matter could be dealt with. In my few closing remarks, Mr Harris, I hope you will allow me to speak and to develop some of the points that my colleagues have made regarding not only the criminal law, but what happens after that. And there are some members in this room who I recognise who have listened to what I've said at least 2 or 3 times previously, because I think I'm on either my 3rd or 4th time of trying to persuade the government of my private member's bill. I've not been successful yet, Mrs Harris, but I continue to live in hope, and that is called the very nattily titled Pet Microchips Bill. And it relates to Gizmo's Law, and Gizmo's Law is a campaign that was begun many years ago by a lady called Helena Abrahams in my constituency, and it essentially does what's been articulated already. It is a campaign which would put a legal requirement. Now that, legal requirement, that's a very grand statement. It basically asks local authorities to do the right thing, that when a deceased cat is found, whether it be on the highway or elsewhere, that the local authorities scan the chip if there is one, and it gets back to my honourable friend's point about the government's commitment to microchipping of cats, which would clearly help this point. But it is a very simple thing. People want to know what's happened to their pet. People want to know what's happened to their cats. And I can tell you, Helena, I was speaking to her today. She works 20 hours a day in her job. She set up a website which essentially is for this purpose. She looks to find and works with local authorities to reunite cats with their owners. And that, to me, is a wonderful thing to do, because it's about love, it's about care, it's about commitment, it's about doing something for other people, and about doing something for other people who have no other way of finding out what's happened. As my honourable friend opposite spoke, local authorities are very different in the way they approach this matter. Some local authorities just do not scan, do not make any effort whatsoever. And I won't name and shame at this moment in time. Some are better. But in terms of the scanning process, what we're simply asking is a duty to take the cat, to scan. We have a pet food company who've agreed to provide scanners for every local authority in the country who haven't got one, so there's no cost in respect of that. All you would need is a fridge or a deep freeze in respect of that. The cost and time involved in this is absolutely negligible. There is no cost. This is a law, my bill, Pet Microchips Bill, and the bill that Olivia has articulated and brought forward is about care, it's about love, it's about doing the right thing, it's about something which sometimes in our debates in this House perhaps we miss. But this is very simple, it's very straightforward, it's an amendment in terms of the debate that we're here today that could quite easily happen within the criminal law, could quite easily be enforceable. We can certainly trust our police and other law enforcement to ensure that cats are treated in parity with other animals, and we can legislate for that. And in terms of Gizmo's Law, in terms of Pets Microchips Bill, I hope that everybody in this House will support, and I hope the Minister will support, a private member's bill which costs nothing, which does a lot of public good, and will make a difference to a lot of people's lives. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris.
Biado Adi.
James, pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. I would like to thank all of those who have participated in the ongoing campaign to have the law changed to protect cats, to those who tweeted #ActForCats, signed and shared the petition, and to the MPs who have signed my EDM calling for the Road Traffic Act to be amended. I'd also like to congratulate my constituent Olivia Holland-Rose, who is here today, whose hard work and campaigning efforts have led to this debate. Now, Olivia started this petition in response to the tragic accident that resulted in the death of her beloved pet, D'Artagnan, or Dart for short. In January last year, Olivia sadly got a knock at the door. Her neighbour gave her the tragic news that Dart had been struck by a car, killed and left by the side of the road. And it was only through the kindness of a stranger who found D'Artagnan's body and proceeded to inquire about his owner that a neighbour was able to recognise him and inform Olivia and her husband of the accident. Had the driver who had initially hit D'Artagnan done this, and had the law required the driver to have reported the collision, then there's a possibility that D'Artagnan could have been taken to the vet in time to potentially save his life. But as Section 170 of the Road Traffic Act requires drivers to report an accident involving horses, cattle, mules, sheep, pigs, goats or dogs, and not cats, the driver had no legal obligation to report the collision, and so they drove off. Olivia and her partner are sadly not alone in this experience, as you've heard, and statistics show that statistics around cats in road collisions are getting harder and harder to gather because a driver doesn't actually have to report the incident in the first place. A report recently from Petplan revealed that approximately 230,000 cats are run over each year, equating to 630 every day, and that 35% of drivers admit to having hit a cat themselves. And with approximately 12.2 million cat owners living in cats living in UK households, those figures are likely to be considerably higher today. As a nation of animal lovers, we can all sympathise with the devastation a pet owner feels when their beloved pet passes away. And though I don't have any pets myself, a member of my team has a dog that often stops past our constituency offices. And coincidentally, the dog is called Belle, although I can assure you the dog wasn't named after me. She was named years before we ever met her. And anyone who's visited my constituency office or has been out campaigning with me is likely to have met Belle, and she's become a beloved member of the team. Now, I know myself, my team, and indeed Belle's owners would be absolutely devastated if she were to be struck by a vehicle, but at least we have some reassurance that if this were to happen, the driver is legally obligated to report it, and we'd stand a higher chance of getting her to a vet in time if that was possible to potentially save her life. Cat owners do not have this luxury because cats are inexplicably excluded from this section of the Road Traffic Act. It seems ridiculous to me that pigs, dogs, cattle and horses are protected, but cats aren't. The law was created because of these animals' status as working animals, but we have evolved beyond appreciating animals solely for their economic value, and it's time our laws change to reflect that. In response to the petition, the government stated that rather than changing a law, to make roads safer, what they would want to do is to introduce compulsory microchipping. Now, microchipping cats is certainly a good policy. It's one that we seem to agree with right around this house, but a cat is no more likely to survive being hit by a car just because they were microchipped. The odds are already stacked against the cat. Microchipping cats will not increase their chances of survival. And while I also agree with the ambition to make roads safer in major cities, where cars are ever present and cat ownership is high, collisions are almost always going to be likely. These measures have to be paired with a change in the law that will require drivers to stop and report the collision, increasing the chances of the cat getting to life-saving treatment and potentially saving another family from losing their beloved pet. And if they do lose their beloved pet, at least giving them the closure of letting them know. Now, there is no reason that we can see for the law to exclude cats, and there are no excuses that can be made to be justified amending the law. It's such a small change, and I'd like the Minister to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is something that can be changed by a delegated legislation committee, by statutory instrument. It would take a few of us from this House, very little at House time at all, just to reinsert that word, or insert that word if you've heard before. I'm sure, or I hope we all agree, that cats deserve to be treated the same as dogs, horses, pigs and all the other animals cited in this Act, and that it's about time that the law was changed accordingly. Thank you very much.
Harry.
Thank you very much, Mrs Harris, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair today. I have to declare an interest as the owner of two very pampered and special cats, Millie, who is 14 years old, and Louis, who moved into his forever home with us during lockdown from the comfort of the Cats Protection Adoption Centre in Exeter. I also have to make members aware that I have another interest as co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for cats. In my mind, a home isn't a home without a cat, and both my cats could be described as sharing their house with my husband and I. They have Natalie and Caroline, who visit and look after them whilst we are in London, and certainly greet us on our return, but probably this is just to secure more dreamies. I believe that cats should receive the same treatment under Section 170 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. A driver is required, as has been described before, to report an accident involving specific animals, including horses, cattle, asses, mules. I won't go on, it's already been said, but not cats or wild animals. The government has said this requirement arises from their status as working animals rather than domestic pets. Well, don't forget, cats often do work, particularly in the countryside, where they keep vermin down. So I cannot see how you cannot describe a cat as a working animal. To introduce such a measure with the provision of 170 would require primary legislation. Well, Mrs Harris, I would ask the government to consider introducing the required legislation at the earliest possible time. I'd like to share something I witnessed that happened in my division when I was a Cornwall County councillor. It involved a cat called Topsy, who belonged to my son's best friend. I was following a car who hit a cat and saw the driver get out and carefully place the cat in his car. It looked like Topsy, but I wasn't sure. The mother of this 5-year-old told me the next day that her son was distraught at the loss of his pet, who had not returned home. I relayed to her that I may have witnessed an accident involving Topsy the cat, but had not been able to get the car registration number. This story has a happy ending. The young man who had lifted the cat carefully into his car had taken her to the vets. She received treatment, and an advert was placed in the local shop window calling for the owner to come forward. I'd emphasise this incident happened before social media was widely used to publicise things. Topsy was reunited with her owner and lived a long and happy life. My own experience doesn't have such a happy outcome. I had a little black cat called Biscay. He would happily hunt in and around the gardens and the neighbourhood. One day, a neighbour informed me that little Biscay was seen in the driveway of a house behind mine, and when I got there, I realised he'd been injured and had died. Many more cats in my neighbourhood have suffered the same fatal ending to their lives, and as the local councillor, I explored what could be done to make this very narrow lane safer for both pets and pedestrians. I explained to council officers that the road was regularly used by primary school children, and each cat that had suffered a fatal accident could have potentially been a child. I was told that there were no statistics kept for cats, as these incidents were not reportable. Fortunately, I persevered and managed to get road traffic calming in place on this road to slow the traffic. This would have been far easier if each accident involving a cat had been reportable and official statistics readily available. It's a shame that we do not hear more positive stories such as Topsy, and it's essential that we remember that cats are, more often than not, a family member, and we should ensure that they are respected. We should also remember that statistics can often be used, as I have mentioned, to introduce road safety measures which do help pedestrians, and I urge the Minister to explore introducing this legislation as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Mrs Harris.
Thank you,
Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairpersonship. Cats get a bad rap. They are working animals. The reason that cats are in this country and widespread around the world is because they had a job. They had a job to do and still have a job to do in many different guises, which, as my honourable friend has said, is to keep vermin down. But they constantly get a bad rap. as a family pet of cat owners, I loyally are owned by 2 rescue cats and have constantly had cats throughout our lives. And growing up as a child, my cats were my constant companions, and it was devastating when, as we have spoken about here, all too often a cat ends up being knocked over and left for dead. Sadly, in this autumn, while I was walking around the constituency with a friend, as we turned a corner, we came across a cat in a very bad state on a pavement. The cat was still alive, so I suggested that my friend went to go and get her car, and I did what ideally the car owner who hit the cat should have done, which is I randomly knocked on doors to see who would answer. It is quite a nerve-wracking thing to do, because how do you tell somebody who you've never met before that you may have a very, very poorly pet in front of you? But I felt that as a good neighbour and somebody who knows what it's like to lose a pet, that I would hope somebody would do that for me. So I knocked on doors and I managed to find the owner, and I said, if you've got a black and white cat, he's still alive, but sadly, I think he's been hit by a car. There were quite a few people that they thought owned black and white cats, but when I took the owner to see him, it was their family pet, Stevie. Stevie was in a really bad way. I took my jacket off and cradled him for my constituent, Helen Bampton, to be able for us to take him to the Blue Cross. The Blue Cross were absolutely fantastic, but sadly for Helen and her family and for Stevie, his injuries were too terrible for him to survive, and sadly he had to be put to sleep. It's really, really sad that we are in a situation where, for the insertion of just one more animal in the legislation, that we could make sure that cats could be protected. But we know that that isn't the panacea, and what we want to do is have people to realise that actually there are very few cats in this country, with thanks to organisations like Cats Protection and others. There are very few stray cats in this country. Most cats will have an owner and they will have a family. And so whenever you do anything to any animal or a cat, inadvertently, it can happen very, very quickly. We know cats can move very quickly, especially if their owner sometimes is calling them, they're trying to get home. That is a pet. Having spoken to the police, if a cat was stolen, they would actually treat that as a theft. And so I don't understand why a cat can be seen as a possession, as something important enough for the police to investigate it, but it's not important enough for it to be a legal requirement for somebody to actually report it to the police.
It's also anomalous that Highways England is required as part of its contracts. The contractors are required to report, to identify cats where possible. That seems an entirely anomalous situation as far as the government's concerned. If it requires it, that would be for major trunk roads, for motorways. Why does it not require it generally?
Yes,
the Honourable Gentleman is quite correct. And to add to that, we have another anomaly as well. Rule 286 of the Highway Code advises that if drivers need to report any accident involving an animal to the police, and if possible, to make inquiries to ascertain the owner of the domestic animals, such as cats, and to advise them of the situation. So we have that in the Highway Code already. So I don't quite understand why we're advising that in the Highway Code, but then we don't have any legal protection from owners and their cats as well. And I would really like the Minister to be able to go back to his department and really ask this question, because we know, as honourable members have already said, over 12 million cats are in the country, and that's around 28% of homes actually own a cat or cats. This is very important to people, and it's especially important to those people who've experienced the loss of their cat, and either not knowing or sadly knowing and seeing that somebody has hit their pet and has deemed it not important enough to actually take care, and if not at the moment because it's a legal requirement, not to have to report it to the police, at least be neighbourly and have some community heart and actually go and knock on a door and find out who's the owner is, and to be able to have some consolation with them. Everybody knows that these things potentially are not done on purpose, and it's just the right thing to do. So I'd like to ask the Minister to go back and actually consider that, the fact that it's already advising that in the Highway Code for road users anyway. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
SNP spokesman Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too welcome you to your place to preside over this important debate. And I am delighted to participate in this debate arising from E-petition relating to requirements to stop and report road traffic collisions involving cats. And I want to thank the Honourable Lady from Gower who opened this debate with a comprehensive overview of the situation which we find ourselves. I want to begin by paying tribute to those charities such as Cat Protection, Blue Cross and Battersea who do so much to promote the well-being of animals, as well as providing us with some very important briefings for this debate. And I should declare, Madam Chair, that I am today using my Cat Protection pen, which I received at the Cat Protection event just before Christmas. Everyone appreciates the importance of family pets, and we can all appreciate the distress, the trauma when a family pet goes missing. Thankfully, many cats who wander off in their adventures soon return home safely when they're hungry enough. However, there are cat owners whose cats wander off and never see them again. And sadly, it is the case that on occasion, this is due to the cat being knocked down by a car, left on a roadside, or staggering away from the scene of an accident only to die before it can reach home. Owners are left distressed, often with no information, and sadly, those who have pets will understand this. In such cases, they feel as though a family member, a beloved family member, has simply vanished. Those who own pets, as I once did, a cat owner, the much-missed Kitty and Misty, and I hope to own cats again at some point, but those who own pets and cats benefit from them in so many ways. And that is why they are loved as members of our families. They provide huge comfort, health benefits, and also go a long way to combating loneliness. And I speak, Madam Chair, as a Vice Chair of the all-party parliamentary group on cats. But this petition is not party political, as we've heard from the consensus around this chamber. This petition is about doing the right thing, doing a simple thing that will do so much for cat owners, calling for cats to be accorded the same legal recognition and obligations as dogs under the Road Traffic Act 1988, requiring drivers to stop and report accidents when they occur involving a cat. And this is not in any way a controversial request for our feline friends to be accorded the parity in law with dogs when it comes to road collisions. And I honestly, the last time we debated this was in 2019, and I honestly can't understand why we're still debating the need for this recognition. We all understand that for this to really work, if this change were to be made in the law, we need joined-up thinking as well. We need to get to a place where we have compulsory microchipping for cats so that, should they meet with an accident, their owners can be informed. Compulsory chipping has not yet happened. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady in just a moment. Compulsory chipping has not yet happened, but I remind the Minister, and I'm sure I don't need to remind him, but I will, Madam Chair, the Tory manifesto in 2019 did commit to, and I quote, bring forward cat microchipping, giving cat owners peace of mind. That's a Tory policy I and everybody in this chamber can support. And it's not often the Minister will hear that. However, there's been no movement on that, and that needs to change. And yes, I will let the Honourable Lady.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. The Government stance has been that there is no need to legislate a requirement for local authorities to scan cats for microchipping because the majority already do so as best practice. Does the honourable member share my concern that that leaves policies at local authorities too open to change? For example, where budgetary restrictions mean there are less staff available to perform this task?
Patricia Gibson.
For that intervention, yes, and I know that many local authorities work very hard, and I'll talk about this in more detail later. Many local authorities currently work very hard to screen cats for microchipping where possible. We know that local councils are under pressure, but it is important that there is a lead given at central government level in both Scotland and across the UK. It's really important that we have that leadership and that support, and I'll talk in a wee bit later about how cat protection provide very important support in this regard as well. The Scottish Government recommends that all cat owners should microchip their pets so they can be reunited with their owners if they are lost or injured. But the Scottish Government has not yet moved towards compulsory microchipping. And that's a move that I want to see take place. However, the Scottish Government is willing to examine and reflect on the DEFRA call for evidence and recent public consultation on this matter. I am confident that we will get to a place where cat microchipping will be compulsory, a compulsory element of cat ownership, just as it is with dog ownership. Because like many others, I'm keen to reach that point as soon as possible. The responsibility of owning a cat and the responsibility towards cat owners ought not to be different from those rights and benefits currently accorded to dogs and dog owners. In the UK Government's Action Plan for Animal Welfare, published in May 2021, the commitment to cat microchipping was repeated, that plan said, and I quote, "We will introduce compulsory cat microchipping to ensure lost or stolen cats can be reunited with their owners as quickly as possible." But we are still in the dark as to what is happening with the implementation of the Action Plan for Animal Welfare. Just as, incidentally, we are in the dark with the Kept Animals Bill, a bill which ought to legislate on very important aspects of animal welfare, and undoubtedly we'll debate that again in another day soon. And this matters because it's all part of the same conversation about the small amendment that we require for the Road Traffic Act 1988. The vast majority of cats in Scotland are actually microchipped, around 70%, which I believe demonstrates that most cat owners understand the benefits of doing so. But around 29% are still not microchipped. And that amounts to around 227,000 cats with no permanent form of identification. And that is a problem. The sad reality is, and we've heard the heartbreak around the chamber of cat owners who either don't know what's happened to their cat or have to deal with a cat having been struck by a car and finding out sometimes by accident. But the sad reality is we don't know how many cats are involved in road traffic accidents because it's not a legal requirement for a driver to report a collision with a cat. But Pet Plan believes that around 630 cats every day are run over. That's a huge amount. And 35% of drivers admit to having hit a cat. And it's believed that around between 7 and 9 million cats are at risk every day of being involved in a road traffic accident, given the free-roaming nature of our feline friends. But if we are seeing increasing number of cats being microchipped and seeking to move to a point where all cats are microchipped as soon as possible, it's important that the measures are in place where those microchips are able to be scanned. And I want to applaud the work of Cats Protection, which has worked with local authorities, some local authorities, to provide scanners to ensure that cats found on roads can be identified. Local authorities are also working hard to ensure they're able to do this, as revealed by the Cats Protection Freedom of Information request. But there's still some way to go on this, and I think the call for the creation of best practice guidance for local councils will be supported by all responsible cat owners, since this will ensure that all cats who may be found on our roads are scanned for a microchip, their details logged and their owners informed, so they can find out what has become of their beloved pet. Heartbreaking, as the Honourable Lady said, heartbreaking though that news can be. Yeah.
Why best practice guidance rather than the legal requirement?
Margaret
I think perhaps for speaking at cross purposes, I think there should be, I've said in my speech, I think there should be legal requirement for microchipping, but how local authorities manage that information and roll that out, we want to look at the best way that that can be done so that it can be completed as soon as possible. But yes, I do believe that microchipping should be a legal requirement. I also want to echo the eminently sensible concerns expressed by Blue Cross that if all of this work is done in the way we would wish in the interests of cat owners and cats themselves, there has to be, and this perhaps is picking up the point the honourable gentleman is making, there has to be a well-administered and efficient communication between database companies to make sure that microchip details and information on lost, stolen or injured pets is properly shared and centrally available. The suggestion of a single point of access would considerably streamline and simplify the current database situation, incomplete though we know that is, and would make it more user-friendly for the designated approved users, saving time and resources as well as providing best outcomes for cats and their owners should the worst happen. It's no surprise to me, Madam Chair, that over 102,000 people signed this petition to appeal to the UK Government to amend legislation in a very simple and straightforward way to make it a legal requirement for drivers to stop and report accidents involving cats, as they are already required to do in the same situation with dogs. Many of us engage in the debate about whether we prefer cats or dogs, and I think we would all agree that cats deserve parity under the law when it comes to road traffic accidents. Across the UK, we love our pets, and animal welfare is important to every one of us. You just need to look at your inbox to see that, Madam Chair. Every single one of us across this House receives more emails about various aspects of animal welfare than any other issue. Something which I have to say took me a little bit by surprise when I was first elected in 2015. We know animal welfare really matters to our constituents, and I know that it matters to MPs across this House. As for our pets, they keep us healthy, they add to our happiness and are treasured family members. Cats do this just as much as dogs do this for us. Some would say even more so, but that will start off a whole UK-wide argument that perhaps would keep us here all day, but there you are. It's clear that if we can give protection to dogs through compulsory microchipping and reporting of accidents when collisions happen, if we can do that for dogs, we can certainly do it for cats. There's no reason for us not to do so. So I urge the UK Government, I urge the Minister to make the required amendment to the Road Traffic Act 1988 and give our cats and their owners the consideration they deserve. Of course, alongside this, we need to ensure cat microchipping is an integral part of cat ownership. And they're given the protection which is currently accorded to dogs. But let's just get on with it and stop any further delays. A promise made in the Minister's Party's manifesto in 2019. This is one of those rare measures, Madam Chair, which will have support from across the House and every party, from every MP. So there's no reason to delay, and it will counter no opposition. So I urge the Minister to speak to his colleagues and get this done. Thank you.
Minister Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. I want to thank the Petitions Committee for bringing forward this important debate, which I know will be closely followed by many of our constituents. I also want to thank all the honourable members who have contributed to this debate today. All have made extremely relevant points, and in particular I want to thank my Honourable friend Gower, who has eloquently explained the details of this issue, and I would also want to go on to thank Olivia, who started this petition some time ago and who amazingly 102, well, probably not amazingly, 102,000 people have signed. We are a country of cat lovers. I have had cats since I was probably a toddler, and I've gone through very many now, unfortunately. And I've also been in the same position that my cat went missing and we did not know what had happened to her, even though we'd scoured the streets and she was actually chipped. And I only found out by accident a few years later, when I was in the vets with another cat, that the woman I was sat next to lived very closely to me, and she could remember seeing him dead, seeing her dead in the roadside. So it took me a bit of time to get to the bottom of that. But I think, like most people, when your cat doesn't come home, you do eventually come to the conclusion that it has come to harm. I think, you know, as an animal lover myself, I know the pain caused by losing a pet. And I also, one day, found a cat behind my bin, believe it or not, and took it to the vet, had it scanned, and unfortunately had not got a microchip, and I did eventually manage to rehouse it with another member of my family, as I already had 3 by then, had been told I couldn't have any more. So, you know, that is difficult, because if that cat had a chip, and it had been compulsory for a chip, we very likely would have been able to return it to its own owner, instead of having to rehouse it with a nice family, I must admit. Oh dear. I'm aware that under Rule 286 of the Highway Code, drivers involved in an accident involving a domestic pet are advised to make inquiries to find their owner. However, the wording of this rule is quite vague and covers a wide range of driving incidents. It's time that this changes so we can include cats, and it's true that many owners ensure that their beloved cats are microchips, but this should be legislated for. Therefore, will the Minister look into updating this legislation to ensure drivers are aware of what they do if they collide with a cat? The vast majority of drivers would want to do the right thing in these situations, but the Highway Code and the in particular, offers little in the way of guidance. My honourable friend from Gower made the point about local authority resources, which are needed, really, if they are to take on the responsibility of scanning animals and then informing owners of the fate of their cats. And I would also like to say at the moment mention and give my thanks to the Cats Protection, who have done so much work on trying to talk to people about it and also raise awareness for owners. Yes, of course.
With regards to the specific point about the local authorities needing resources for scanning, absolutely across the board that needs to be looked at. But the point made by the honourable member for Bury was the principle across the board that local authorities should scan, deceased cats so they could be identified. How that is done across the country is a different matter. But the principle, all cats who are deceased should be scanned so they can be reunited with their loved ones, is the principle that needs to be amended and changed. So there's consistency, not postcode lottery, of where it happens around the country.
Jill Furness.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree. Agree with you and agree with the sentiment that it should be put into legislation, that it is compulsory for all cats to be scanned, because that is the only way that they can be identified. I did have some problems and wonder how we can get around the problem when we heard earlier that 70% of cats who are scanned, in fact, their owners do not actually register them with the company. So I think, government and, this house, if you like, should look at ways of how we can encourage that or do that in a different way to ensure microchipping has not been a waste of time or money, to make sure that microchipping means that cats will be reunited with their owner, or that their owner will be informed of what has happened to them in the past. So that is absolutely what I would say. I was a little disappointed that in its response to the petition, the government says it wants to make roads safe for everyone. But we often see that the reality is quite different. Road safety targets non-existent, road safety strategic framework delayed, highway maintenance funding cut. And after 4 decades of progress reductions in road fatalities, they have plateaued since 2010. So I do feel that this government is dragging its feet on measures to protect road users, human and feline alike. We all know, let's go back to that, we know about the enormous pressures facing local authorities, and the cost of living crisis means that scarce resources are rightly focused on supporting struggling households. But that means road safety, and particularly the scanning and the additional resources, are, if we're going to be serious about this, should be given to local authorities so that they can carry out the vital job of identifying and actually informing cat owners of what has happened. It can't be You know, there has to be some resource attached to it for to actually work. And I just did want to ask as well, while we've got the Minister here, when will his department publish the long-awaited road safety strategy framework? Because it would be good to see something in that and about animal welfare in that, because it is so important, as we know, to our constituents. And I'm also somewhat disappointed on the government's record on protecting animals more widely. It seems to be one of delays and broken promises. Where is the ban on keeping primates as pets? Where is the action to tackle puppy smuggling? Where is the ban on imports of fur? These measures all carry overwhelming public support, but this government has been dragging its feet on all of them for far too long. I hope the Minister will carefully consider all the points raised by honourable members today. The motivations behind these petitions are ones we will all share for beloved family pets to be better protected. We do not need more empty promises which are destined to be dropped or kicked into the long grass. What we need is a government to finally take the wheel and deliver real progress to improve road safety for all users of any species, including cats. But in particular, to make sure that the legislation is there and the Act is the Road Traffic Act 1988 is amended in any way that the government can do that, and hopefully they can do that by SI or delegated legislation, so that we can ensure that no one has to wonder what has happened to their beloved cat, and that the cats share the same protection as other animals. Thank you, Chair.
Minister Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Harris, and it really is an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. As the Honourable Member for Gower pointed out, Britain is a nation of animal lovers, and members of all sides today have made heartfelt speeches, and just want to acknowledge, as he's had to leave early, the work of my honourable friend, the member for Bury North, who's done a huge amount around Gizmo's law and that private members' legislation he's been bringing forwards. I am grateful to honourable members who've spoken in this debate and on the subject of making it a legal requirement for drivers to stop and report collisions with cats. And I'd also like to thank Olivia and the thousands of people from across the country who have also signed the petition which brings us here today. As a backbencher, I spoke out in support of microchipping when in this Westminster Hall less than 2 years ago. And furthermore, let me reassure honourable and right honourable members that the government takes road safety extremely seriously. It's at the core of the department's agenda, and that any death or serious injury on our roads is unacceptable. And our deepest condolences do go out to the victims of road traffic incidents and their families. A focus of the government is to make roads safer for all users, which will in turn also help reduce the risk to all animals on them. And I think we all must be clear of the heartbreak of the loss of pets to people, particularly cats, as we're discussing today. And as my right honourable friend, the member for South East Cornwall said, it is for many people like losing a family member, and other members reflected, particularly during the pandemic, how pets, particularly cats and dogs, had been so important to people for both their mental health, but also more generally their actual physical well-being during what had been a particularly difficult time. The department is working on the road safety strategic framework, which we will be hoping to publish, as the honourable member opposite, we're hoping to publish it in the spring this year to give us some assurance on that. The framework will be based on a safe system approach, and as part of this, we are considering what might be appropriate as supporting indicators on casualty reduction. The key principle of a safe system approach is to recognise that people make mistakes and that things can go wrong. This approach accepts that responsibility is shared and that collisions can be a result of a combination of factors which can be mitigated. The Road Safety Strategic Framework provides the structure needed to deliver a safe system approach effectively and efficiently. This approach is proven to be accepted in many other sectors, including health and safety and in public health as well. It is already adopted in best practice in other countries, which have subsequently gone on to make further significant reductions in road deaths and casualties. And while Britain has some of the safest roads in the world. We can always do more, and we are intent to do just that. Just quickly to address the issue raised by the Honourable Member for Streatham and the opposition front bench. I have been advised by officials that primary legislation would be required to change. It is not a simple SI. But if that doesn't prove to be the case, I will write to both the Honourable Members to clarify that further. Of course I will.
Thank him for all he does on road safety. But with regards to specifically this point about stopping and reporting after an accident, in that review that's taking place on road safety, is the Minister now saying that that review will specifically look at what parliamentarians have said today with regards to amending that legislation and adding cats in with regards to the Road Traffic Act 170 under 1988 legislation and amending? Is he saying that will specifically be looked at? Because at the moment it's not clear if that will be the case or not.
I'm happy to take that
Mr.
back
Holden.
to the Department, and we'll write to the Honourable Member about this issue and the Honourable Member who brought the debate forwards today, because I think it's something that we need to look at urgently, and I will write to him about that. Yes, of course.
And say that would be taken back. The Prime Minister said in his speech in January, we will look at doing things differently. We'll look at innovation. We'll look at doing things and trying new ideas. Yep. This one over here with regards to amending it, not simply the legislation to say about the value of the animal or with regards to if it's wildlife, but with regards to the motive behind the legislation. It's about pain, suffering, alleviating and parity. Will you look at that in line with the Prime Minister's commitment and what's been said today?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Gillingham and Raynham for bringing that forward. I think it is an important issue. I will take it back and write to him about it. It's an important point that he raises, but as I've been saying, we are looking at that holistic approach, that best practice approach adopted in other countries and which we've adopted here in terms of both public health and in terms of health and safety legislation in order to minimise both human impact on humans and I'm prepared to look also in terms of how we can also prevent further injury and accidents with animals. And I was in the department as a special advisor not so that long ago when indeed we also brought forward some new road signage, for example, around protecting small mammals as well. So I think this is something that the government is looking at. It's something that we are prepared to look at. But as I have said, primary legislation would be required on this specific. So I'd like to go slightly more broad on this broader issue, because many members have brought up different aspects of the legislation, including around microchipping, which I want to touch on. Of course I will, yeah.
I thank the Minister for giving way. So just to be clear, you're saying that you're 100% sure that it has to be primary legislation. So what exactly is it that you'd be getting back to us about if that is flexible?
If it isn't primarily, I've been advised that it is. If that is not the case, then I will write to the Honourable Lady and make that clear and what could be done in that instance. But my understanding at the moment is that it is primary legislation.
And just following on from that, I just want to confirm that if it is secondary legislation, will the Minister be taking steps to move it forward?
If it is secondary legislation, we will have to look at that then. But there is I'm assured by officials that it is primary legislation, which would obviously require quite a significant piece of legislation to have to go through the House, both houses. So it would not be it's not a quick fix. So and that obviously then goes into timetabling and all sorts of other issues well beyond my remit as a junior minister. But on the specific issue as to whether it is or isn't, I will definitely write to her about that. I will give way, yes.
Cheryl Murray.
Could my honourable friend just confirm that if it is primary legislation, it may be that a member would like to bring forward a 10-minute rule bill or a private member's bill in order to amend the Act?
Mr Holden.
My honourable friend makes a good point. If it is primary legislation, then the way to change the law could indeed be via a private member's bill legislation in this instance. Whether or not it would get government support and government time, that is a matter for others, but that would be the way in order to do it. While we must do all we can to improve the safety of our roads, we really do need to be very careful to not make any decisions which could make things worse or create other unforeseen effects. In rush to resolve concerns with the law and how it operates. And I think honourable members across the House have actually made some very important points on this, around doing the right thing. And the honourable member for Great Grimsby gave a personal example of Stevie and how she stepped in to do the right thing. And it was another point raised by the honourable member for East Renfrewshire as well, in an intervention that she made about how doing the right thing is particularly important, because as honourable members across the House have pointed to throughout their speeches, although there's no obligation to report all animal collisions on the road, Rule 286 of the Highway Code does advise drivers to report any collision involving an animal to the police, and if possible, they should make inquiries to ascertain the owner of domestic animals to advise them of the situation as well. As honourable members have made clear, including the honourable member for Gower in their opening remarks, cats tend to roam unaccompanied and are likely to go out at night. Drivers also may not realise that they've had a collision with a cat in some instances. Small animals, very similar to rabbits or other wild animals, which can cross roads late at night. There are also hazards associated with stopping to check whether animals are alive or not, if they've knocked them over, especially with very small animals. And having the law to make a requirement to report road collisions involving a cat would be difficult to enforce, especially when, as the honourable members from across the House have made clear, that Pet Plan have suggested that we might be in the terms of hundreds of thousands of these incidents being brought forwards a year. We know that in 2021 there were 348 reported road collisions where both an animal and a person were involved directly. That's just an animal and a person. If we're talking of hundreds of thousands of cases, that would be a huge extra impact and administrative burden, especially given the free-roaming nature of cats. And it's for this reason that the government doesn't plan at present to make it a legal requirement for drivers to stop and report collisions with cats. But I would like to go into some of the issues and what we are attempting to do in this space, because we do recognise how painful it is for owners to lose a pet. I remember as a youngster going home from school and that first time when I realised that animals could die. When my family dog was sadly passed away. And I think we've all had that experience at different points in our lives. And one of the things that we've been really pushing on in the last few years is microchipping as providing the best way for reuniting owners with their pets when they have either been tragically killed or stolen, or a variety of other issues. And since the introduction of compulsory microchipping for dogs in 2016, we've now got over 90% of the dog population microchipped. And this has been particularly successful at increasing reunification rates for stray dogs. As honourable members across the House have pointed out, we do have a manifesto commitment to introduce compulsory cat microchipping, and we consulted on this last year when the consultation resulted in well over 99% support for this measure, which is fantastic. And I spoke in Westminster Hall a couple of years ago on this myself at the time, and it was an issue raised by both the member for Gillingham and Rainham and in Rutherglen and Hamilton West in their remarks. We are committed to introducing this, and we will be laying the legislation for this in coming weeks for England. And I hope that devolved administrations will follow closely, as this is a devolved issue both in Wales and in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And I welcome the words from the member for North Ayrshire and Aaron to use her platform in this place to press for the similar action to be seen in Holyrood and across the rest of the United Kingdom. Because it is terribly sad when a cat is injured or killed on the roads, and it doesn't matter whether it's on this side of the border or elsewhere. National Highways, as the Honourable Member for Gower mentioned, has already required their contractors to record details about any cats and dogs found on the roadside and the location in which they are found. Some of this is due to the nature of the importance of these strategic roads. If there are gaps in fences and things like that, we don't want stray animals on the national highways. So there is a different health and safety dynamic to that, but it is something that we have implemented, and we're under the Department of Transport, which national highways is a direct responsibility of the government. They must also scan for a microchip and store the animal with the aim to reunite it with its owner where possible. Similarly, we understand that the overwhelming majority of local authorities have arrangements in place to scan cats and dogs found by the roadside and to endeavour to reunite the animal with its keeper. Many pets will therefore be reunited, but we do recognise that there may be challenges and impact on successful unification in some cases. For example, sadly, reunification may not be possible if the nature of the animal's injury is affected by the functionality, can affect the functionality of the microchip, or when microchips records are out of date, and that's particularly the case with cats. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
And I'm delighted to hear that he's talking about moving towards a position where microchipping will indeed be compulsory for cat owners and cats. Does he share the view put forward by Blue Cross that in order to make that system as efficient as possible, we should really have a single database where cats are registered in order to make the attempts at reunification more efficient and successful?
It's a very good point the Honourable Member raised, and I'm just about to come on to some of the best practice issues that she raised earlier on. But yes, around compulsory microchipping, yes, it is. The legislation that will be brought forwards is England only, because it's devolved in terms of Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. So I'm hoping that these issues will be also looked at across the other devolved administrations as well in the coming months. We know that local authorities may adopt different approaches to reunited cats and dogs found by the roadside. As one of the honourable members mentioned, 92% of local authorities do have the facilities, but only 75% of them use this. And we need to address that inconsistency, which is particularly important. To show our commitment to this issue, we will shortly be commissioning a research project which will help us better understand any barriers and also explore best practice. We will then work with local authorities and other stakeholders to develop and promote best practice in this area, which I think is particularly important. I would like to particularly pay tribute at this point to Cats Protection, and also volunteers, including Mandy and her team from Cats Matter, Helen Abrahams and her team behind Gizmo's Legacy campaign, and my honourable friend, the member for Bury North, for his and their tireless efforts in helping to reunite animals found by the roadside. We recently consulted on improvements to the current operation of the pet microchipping regime, which the honourable member just mentioned, and we are currently analysing the results of this, and we're publishing these soon. A key area of the consultation was how to make it easier for approved users, including local authorities, to access database records, and that will be part of that response to that consultation. We also consulted on the introduction of a single point of portal search, which would allow approved users to quickly search compliant databases for animal records without needing to contact the database operator directly, which can obviously be time-consuming and act as a deterrent, and something that I found when I was speaking about this issue to vets in my own North West Durham constituency. And quicker access to database records will also help support other campaigns that are seeking to make better use of that microchip scanning, as we've all been discussing. And I'd like to pay a particular tribute at this point, Madam Chair, to Sue and Dawn behind the Tux Law campaign, which has been campaigning for vets to be required to scan microchips and check for rescue backup contact details prior to euthanizing healthy animals. And that's been something which I know members from all sides of this House have been so glad to be able to get behind. We work closely with the campaign and the veterinary profession to find an approach that works for everyone by incorporating the principle of scanning before euthanasia into the guidelines that underpin the Code of Professional Conduct for Veterinary Surgeons. And that is now in place. The new single point of search will also help support the Aims of Ferns Law campaign led by Debbie Matthews, which calls on vets to scan the microchip of animals at the first presentation to check whether the animal is stolen. Another particular issue, and something which can also affect cats as well, which, as we know, have a tendency to roam a little further, usually than other animals. It's therefore, in summary, therefore, the government does believe that microchipping is the most effective and quickest way of helping to return a cat to its owner. We are progressing further on this with both the call for evidence and then new best practice guidelines to come down the line in coming weeks. we'll see that microchip legislation for England coming forwards, and we hope to see that across the rest of the United Kingdom as well. We remain committed to microchipping and look forward to the introduction of legislation to make it compulsory and to make further improvements on this area later in the year. Thank you very much.
Tonia Antoniazzi to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. And I know for you as well, Mrs. Harris, in the Chair, how much your cat Benji means to you and your beloved husband and family. So, you know, at 51 years of age, we've always had a pet in the family, and I know how much it hurts when you lose those pets. But it is welcome what the Minister has said regarding the compulsory microchipping and the legislation that is going to be laid in the coming weeks. So I would like to thank him for that today. And on behalf of Olivia, our petitioner, I hope that members across the House, as has been mentioned, will seek to lay a 10-minute rule bill or a private member's bill to amend the Road to Traffic Act and change it, because it is not fit for purpose. I'd also like to pay tribute to members, especially the member for Bury North and his private member's bill, which I think goes a long way to helping pet owners and cat owners to be reunited. And I'd like to thank everybody that signed the petition and the Petitions Committee for bringing about this debate, and all members that have participated this evening. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 607317 relating to requirements to stop and report road traffic collisions involving cats. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order. Order. My Benji got mentioned.